Thank you so much, Patty. I was almost hoping you'd cue Mamma Mia, because I was ready to get that dance party going, but yeah, we got that crowd going. I also want to extend a huge thank you to Nikki, Kate, and the entire Be Bold team for allowing me to be a part of this night. I am so honored and humbled to be here among so many incredible leaders. I'm not gonna lie, when you first asked me to do this, and I heard the theme was something to do with investing, as a 24-year-old working 2 nonprofit jobs, it's safe to say I didn't think I'd have much to contribute to the conversation. But I think that's what's so special about tonight. We have seen and heard about so many ways that you can invest in women. Yes, financially, but so much more. So tonight, I want to take a different lens, and I want to talk about investing in your path. Let me explain. At the age of 11, shortly before my long-anticipated 5th grade graduation, my family received some devastating news. My mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer. At that age, I obviously had so many questions and concerns. But there was one thing I knew to be true. I would find a way to support my mom as best as my 11-year-old self could. So as soon as bits of her hair began falling out from her chemotherapy treatment, I had my answer. I would shave my head alongside of her so she wouldn't have to experience this alone. Sure enough, days later, we found ourselves in her bathroom with the electric razor in hand. When all was said and done, I looked in the mirror and quite literally looked like my brother. But more importantly, I looked internally and saw a bold, empathetic 11-year-old girl that just proved to herself she wasn't afraid of anything in the world. Now, for the sake of time, I'll refrain from diving into all the stories that followed. But as you can imagine, walking into the first day of middle school wearing basketball shorts, a baggy t-shirt, and rocking this buzz cut didn't bode well for the day to follow. I was called a boy on several occasions, in fact, kicked out of the girls' locker room, and later that week was called a boy in a bikini at the local beach. Don't worry, you can laugh, because we all laughed about it back then too. I was so confident in what I had done for my mom that no one could convince me otherwise. And it was in this moment that I made my first big, bold investment in a path I still find myself on today. Not a path of least resistance, where you're protected from the obstacles and hardships of life, but a path of greatest persistence. One that equips you with the boldness to face those challenges head on when they do present themselves. So fast forward a few years, which, by the way, my mom kicked cancer's ass and is sitting out there in the audience today. I was a senior in high school with my eyes set on my next big chapter, competing as a Division I soccer player at the University of Washington. I had committed to play there my sophomore year of high school. My high school team had just won our 2nd state championship. Yep. And my friend and I had recently just played in the high school All-American soccer game. So while everything was going according to plan on the field, the same couldn't be said off the field. I had started experiencing some weird neurological symptoms, but of course, I brushed them off, attributing my numb and tingling legs to cleats that were too tight, and throwing up after games to being out of shape. So, as most athletes would do in that situation, I simply bought a pair of bigger cleats and took to the field before and after school to get into better shape. But the symptoms persisted and eventually progressed. I was dealing with daily headaches, throwing up, numbness and tingling, zinging sensations that ran down my back and legs, and more. So one trip to the neurologist, and 3 hours of MRIs later, I had a confirmed diagnosis. I have multiple sclerosis. This was a big blow, and one I wasn't expecting at the age of 18, just months before going to college. With this diagnosis, however, I wasn't forging a new path like we'd done years before with my mother's breast cancer. This time, all I had to do was put one foot in front of the other on a path we already found ourselves on, our path of greatest persistence. We had already made the investment, and now all I needed to do was learn to trust in its growth. So the day after my diagnosis, I was in the doctor's office and ready to take action. We started on my medication, I was treated with steroids, and we dove into the literature on how I could live my best life with MS. Never once, though, did I question if I'd be able to play soccer again. I had the answer. I was gonna do whatever it took to get back on the field and play for the Huskies. And of course, I did just that. Thanks to the help of my family, my friends, my teammates, my coaches, and everyone in between, I was back on the field and in the lineup with the Huskies by my senior season. Throughout my career, I also began connecting with other individuals that were living with MS, who were also young, also optimistic about the prognosis of their disease, and very active. So we started talking about ways that we could thrive with MS. There was one gal in particular that I had connected with, a 17-year-old who had been living with MS for 2 years. As luck would have it, she was from Eastern Washington. So at my last ever game in Pullman against the Cougs, Lexi was able to come watch me play. And boy, am I glad she did. That game was a fairy tale storybook ending to my career. Snow was falling from the sky, my whole family had flown in for the game, I dished out a few assists, and of course, we won. So as I ran over to my family after the game, I looked up into the stands and I saw Lexi. And I was reminded of her story. She had been living with MS for 2 months, but upon her diagnosis, assumed and was told that soccer wouldn't be in the cards anymore. But that day in Pullman changed everything for her. The following week, she laced up her boots and returned back to the soccer field to play with her team, realizing that her dreams of playing soccer were also possible. And that's the beautiful thing about following a path. I could have seen that day in Pullman as the end of the road for me, but Lexi was the sign pointing me to a new destination. Lexi was the sign that it was time to cash out my investment and start spreading the wealth. So I returned home and started looking into how to start a 501c3, which you all just talked about, and I can attest it's quite the process. Now, at the same time, I was also a senior in college, and so I was wrapping up my undergraduate degree in neuroscience and was studying for the medical school admissions test, the MCAT. Now, if you haven't heard of the MCAT, good, keep it that way. I spent practically my whole life preparing for this test, 5 months of prep courses and practice tests, and it was all gonna happen in May. So my plan was to take the MCAT in May, graduate in June, and then I would launch the nonprofit in fall. Well, the man upstairs had other plans in mind. The day before my MCAT, I was laying in my bed, listening to some sort of calming music to rid my anxiety about test day, when I received a call from someone at the Seattle Kraken. I answered the phone, and they informed me that I had just gotten game tickets for Game 6 of the playoffs happening that Saturday. I was thrilled, but again, had to take the MCAT the next day. They kept talking, and I realized it wasn't just game tickets. I had been nominated as the hero of the deep for that game. If you've ever been to a Seattle Kraken game, you may know, yeah, go Kraken. Next year's gonna be a different year, all right? If you've ever been to one of their games, you may know that at every game, they honor one individual who's making a positive impact in the community. And on that Saturday, that individual would be me. All I had to do was get through the MCAT. They kept talking, and it led to the last and best part of all of this. The Seattle Kraken donate $32,000 to your nonprofit on that night. All of a sudden, any anxiety I had about test day was gone. I hung up the phone, I called my team, informing them that we would not be launching in the fall, but rather that next day while I was taking the MCAT. So of course, as I was in the MCAT, answering questions related to organic chemistry, my team launched us. And that next day, we found ourselves at Climate Pledge Arena. The Kraken CEO was sharing my story with the whole crowd, And on day one of business operations, we had $32K in our bank account. Today, my nonprofit organization, MS I'm Possible, provides community support and financial assistance to individuals under 35 living with MS. Since our launch just under a year ago, we have worked and connected with over 55 young adults with MS who all believe that their dreams, their goals, and their aspirations are possible. How? Because they've all invested in the path of greatest persistence too. Over the past year, I've been asked by quite a few folks how, at the age of 23, I worked up the courage to start a nonprofit. But the truth is, it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it started 10 years ago, when I made that bold investment. At the age of 11, I invested in my mom's health with no clue what would result. And at the age of 23, I was cashing out that same investment to support the health of young adults with MS from all over the country. And this is what leads me to my next point. You aren't meant to walk this path alone. When I was finally able to come up for some air a few months ago, I realized it was time to start looking for another role that would not only support me financially, you're welcome, Dad, but would also prevent me from burning out with the role I was doing at MS I'm Possible. I stumbled upon a role at a different nonprofit and decided to ditch my MCAT and Neuroscience degree and instead become a program manager at a nonprofit I knew absolutely nothing about. Lo and behold, it was the best decision I've made to date. My experiences working alongside two incredible female leaders has shown me another key component of these types of investments. Equally as important is investing in the paths of others and clinging on to the people who also invest in yours. And that's exactly what Deanna and Phyllis have done at Board Ready. They empower me on my own path while finding avenues to bring me along on theirs too. So I close with this. I think sometimes that investment word can be scary. When should you do it? How should you do it? Where should you invest? My take: don't wait to have it all together to make that investment. Take the leap, follow the signs, and find the people that help push your pace on your path of greatest persistence. Thank you.